Hey guys, it's Liv here. In today's video, we're going to be doing a new type of video on the channel, I guess. I have thought about doing this for a while, but honestly, it was the push from the people who are actually our channel members. A couple of them had suggested this, and I decided that I would finally follow through with it. So today, we're going to do a team building guide on well, we're going to try and do these every Wednesday, but this week's in particular is on one of the most common balance cores, my worst playstyle of all time, Palafin balance. And so if you enjoy and you want to see some more like this, of course, like and subscribe and answer the comment question of the day. What would you guys like to see next for the next team building guide? It could be whatever you guys want to see. I'm fine with covering whatever as long as it's within reason. It needs to be something that's obviously somewhat buildable. Like if someone asks me to build like a Sunkern team, I'm clearly not going to do that. But you know, if it's within reason, I can try and tackle it for next week. But with that said, let's get started. First, I do want to start off before we get into the team on just giving just a little bit of an info dump on what Palafin balance is for anyone who might be newer to the scene or might be wondering just what this core is, things that it typically incorporates, why it typically is ran, and all that sort of stuff before we try and build our own version of it. So typically, Palafin balance, I'm not really sure which of these you could attribute it to, but it's definitely one of these two regionals, either the Fort Wayne or Sydney regionals. Really, they both happen at the same weekend, actually, so it's pretty hard to just say that one of these in particular was the original or not. But as far as the regional goes, typically, these Palafin balance teams consisted of Palafin, Arcanine, Amoonguss, and Fluttermane. You guys probably saw a bunch of different names for this core. We're calling it Palafin balance for this video. But the core essentially, it really does boil down specifically to Arcanine, Amoonguss, and Palafin as the starting point. I feel like Fluttermane is really just a good accessory onto the team, and there are a couple of matchups it definitely does help with. But typically, I do think that the core is more attributed to these three in particular, the Arcanine, Amoonguss, and Palafin, with Fluttermane just being there because it's such a good mon, and that's really the big reason for it. But outside of that, though, Fluttermane still does offer a bit to this core. For one, if you look at the first three, obviously, you can see that the team definitely does struggle with a couple of really top mons. For one, Baxcalibur is a huge ripper, not only to balance teams in general, but especially to those three. Arcanine typically doesn't really run a move that can actually comfortably touch it, the best one probably being E-Speed. I guess Flare Blitz is okay, but you're boosting the thermal exchange anyway. Amoonguss's best way of doing it would typically be going for like a Terra and then Rage Powdering it in while you try and bully it with one of Palafin or Arcanine. And then Palafin typically just runs mono water, so you really do need to force it to Terra, which is where the Fluttermane comes in, because Fluttermane can typically pressure that. It's a really good check to this core. Some other decent things, Gyarados is another really good check to that core. With Gyarados obviously being a good resistance to Arcanine, it can typically Terra around Amoonguss, though at the same time you don't really need to. It's just if you have Terra Blast, you can run like a Terra Flying for that matchup, for example. And then you just check Palafin naturally with your typing, as well as the ability to Intimidate. So typically, again, Palafin, Arcanine, and Amoonguss do struggle with a couple of these really bulky mons that do resist Arcanine in particular, or Palafin in particular as well. And Fluttermane has actually also adapted to this as well by running Thunderbolt on their choice spec set. So just running Thunderbolt on sets that aren't running Protect, Dual Stab, which does help a lot with this matchup because sometimes Gyarados do typically run like a Terra Steel, for example. And while Arcanine can definitely handle that, you can definitely position Gyarados to still beat it anyway. So it's give and take there, and I do think that having Fluttermane, at least to force the Terra set early on, so then you can beat Gyarados with Arcanine is pretty valuable, or with Palafin as well. So these four essentially are really good together. I do think that Fluttermane still is an accessory, but it's a good one to put on the team, and you really don't lose anything adding it to those cores. We can see that trace back as well into the team that like Justin Tang won, for example, with. Again, these four in particular are still ran, with Chimpao and Dragon Ball being the accessories. In the case with Sam Pandelis' team, it's Tinglu and Roaring Moon. And even if we go to like European Internets, for example, we have some other ones like Tinglu Dragonite, for example, on this team down below. Which was ran by Nicholas Khan. We also do have some other examples of this. I mean, I guess the Galvin Huey team has just Azumarill over Palafin, which does have some merit here. Azumarill being just a slightly worse version with the slightly weaker version of the water priority, as well as the fact that it also, at the very least on the upside, gets a slightly better ability, at least for the whole game. Palafin's really, it needs to switch, which does lead me to my next point, I guess. Well, I do want to cover really quickly some of the other teams. Like, for example, we can have the Chimpao Dragapult version of this. We do have Tinglu can Gambit even. So these back mons can really be whatever. Even in European Internets, again, Tinglu Roaring Moon from Paul Chua. We do have Tinglu Baxcalibur. So You can even see like Tinglu Iron Hands down here. The point is that there's a lot of options. We even saw, as I said, while Fluttermane isn't necessarily 100% needed, it's still a good piece, but you can even fit Goldengo here. Does a similar role of being a check to Gyarados and Baxcalibur. With the Gyarados in particular, you could just out-damage it, to be completely honest, because Gyarados can't really intimidate you. It can't Thunder Wave you thanks to good as gold. It can't even stop you from from nasty plotting by going for taunt. So it can do a lot in that matchup as well, and it functions as a similar role, just albeit slower. But it doesn't really matter when you have Chien-Pao Dragonite as priority here, so Goldengo still is a good fit, and it offers a slightly better defensive check to Baxcalibur in exchange. So essentially, though, the teams all boil down to the same first 3 mons, which is for good reason. If we go back to our showdown window here, we can go and we'll start off with the actual team itself. So Amoonguss, and then we have Palafin, and then we have Arcanine. So why do these teams all start off with these same 3 mons? So it's pretty simple, actually. One of the biggest reasons that you run Palafin is to try and switch it out usually as quickly as possible. Now, there are certain archetypes such as Talonflame Tailwind teams where you can benefit from just staying in and clicking a Terra Water Jet Punch. These do run typically Terra Water, by the way. Arcanine can go for a defensive Terra, usually Water or Grass. For the sake of this, we'll go with Grass, just because it does give a little bit better of a ground check on this team, but you can go with either one. In Amoonguss's case, it typically is just any sort of Terra type. You can see Fire, Water, or Dark typically ran. For the sake of this one, I am going to go with Fire, as I do think the Fire is slightly more consistent. You could typically get something like a consistent Fairy check out of this still, which Amoonguss can do anyway, but you do resist Flutter and Mystical Fire, which is a nice benefit. You also do check things like Palafin, pre-Terra at the very least, and Gyarados pre-Terra, while with the post-Terra, you're more so checking different offensive Fairies, offensive Fire types like Arcanine, or even just the point being is just you're checking a lot of different things. Torkoal is another big one with this, so it's a nice little middle ground. Water does still offer a lot as well, though. You can go with either one. For the sake of this, we're going to go with Fire. But essentially, though, Palafin does really benefit off of switching out early on in most cases. So having a Pokemon like Arcanine, for example, on the lead, which can force your opponents to also switch because you go for Intimidate, which is pretty valuable. Or you can have a Amoonguss on lead, which can at the very least take a hit and then switch back out and regen off the damage. And especially with the fact that Amoonguss, Palafin, and Arcanine all benefit from the switching consistently, it's a really strong start to this team. In Arcanine's case, you do benefit from cycling Intimidates. With Amoonguss's case, you benefit from cycling the Regenerator ability. And with Palafin's case, it's 0 to Hero. So these 3 essentially do form a really strong Fire, Water, Grass core, which does give you a nice start to a team. While Fire, Water, Grass isn't exactly some mandatory core on any given team, I know that some people will typically in very early team building videos throw around that you have to have like a Fire, Water, Grass core, or a Steel Dragon Fairy core, or really any of those sort of like very basic fundamental core triangles where Fire counters Grass, Grass counters Water, and then Water counters Fire. You don't really need that typically, however, they do still have some good benefits, and they are standard type cores for a reason. In this case in particular, Amoonguss is really good at checking Palafin for this team, which Arcanine would have to otherwise Terra for. And Palafin, while it can obviously do some good damage to Palafin in mirrors, isn't really going to do the damage back. These two also stop mons like Dozo for Arcanine in particular, which is really good. And if Dozo goes for like a Terra Grass to beat Palafin, you do have Arcanine at least to try and switch in Cycle Intimidates, burn it as well. And while you would take a lot from Wave Crash, at the same time, you do have Haze Palafin typically on these cores, which can obviously slow down Dozo, and it makes it so Arcanine can actually just outpace and go for like a Will-O-Wisp here. Oh, I put Wild Charge, that's meant to be Will-O-Wisp. The point being, though, is that these 3 definitely do benefit a lot for each other. Typically, Amoonguss, you'll run Rage Powder, Spore, and then the rest are really filler. Typically, you'll most likely see Pollen Puff and Protect, though there are some other strong options you can run as well. While Amoonguss can definitely run moves like Clear Smog as well as Leaf Storm, they're not really needed on this archetype because of the Haze Palafin that you have that's already meant to handle Dozo. And Clear Smog and Leaf Storm are both meant to just be good ways of handling Dozo anyway. With Clear Smog, you can drop its stats to no boosts, and with the Leaf Storm in particular, you have really strong Grass attack that can cycle through pre-Terra Dozo, especially because of the fact that you never need to care about the special attack drops because Dozo has Unaware as its typical ability. With this Amoonguss in particular, you'll run either Citrus or Rocky Helmet. I do like Citrus a little bit better on this core. You don't really need Rocky Helmet, though depending on your team partners, Rocky Helmet is still a fairly valuable item. I'm not really sure on the specific investments. Truthfully, these do change a lot. The one thing is consistent though with Palafin typically doesn't really run any speed here. It typically just goes with 252 attack, 252 HP, and 4 in the speed stat. Though sometimes people will run like a 20 speed Palafin or like a 36 speed Palafin even. You don't really need a lot of speed on this in particular. Mostly just because of the fact that you're clicking Jet Punch for priority, or you're clicking Wave Crash just for strong damage, and most of the things you click Wave Crash on are slower than you could ever be with this anyway. For the most cases, you're running either Safety Goggles or Mystic Water. Typically, I do like the fact that Palafin can just run Mystic Water. It's an item that you don't take away a slot from any other mon on the team. Safety Goggles, Palafin is really good though, objectively speaking, but Arcanine also typically does compete with that Safety Goggles slot. So in this particular case, if you were to, let's say, look at any of these other teams that we could pull up actually, for example, we do have this team right here, which had the Safety Goggles Arcanine and Mystic Water on the Palafin. We do have this team right here, which runs Safety Goggles and Mystic Water yet again. We can look at Justin Tang's team, Safety Goggles and Mystic Water. We can look at this team right here, and again, Safety Goggles and Mystic Water. We can continue going down the line. Typically, you will see Safety Goggles and Mystic Water, but despite the fact that Safety Goggles Palafin is still really good, it still has a lot of benefits here. I'm trying to see if there actually is a single one that top cut that does not have Safety Goggles and Mystic Water. Nope, Safety Goggles and Mystic Water. And then final one, yep, Safety Goggles and Mystic Water. Okay, so it's pretty consistent, at least among all of these. As I said, the Terra types do change. We're seeing some flying, we're seeing some water. Amoonguss, for example. We're seeing some grass and, yep, again, water Amoonguss. Grass and electric Amoonguss. We're seeing water and flying. We're seeing flying and water. We're seeing flying and steel. We're seeing water and ghost. And we're seeing water and grass. So yeah, you could clearly see the versatility here in terms of what these actually do run for Terra types. Sadly though, the item versatility isn't typically there, but if you wanted to run like a Safety Goggles Palafin, you would typically just change this to like a Rocky Helmet, or maybe even like an Agua Berry, and you make Arcanine Citrus at that point. That's still a really good option for the team, but typically though, the items end up falling with Safety Goggles on Arcanine, and then you have these two right here with Mystic Water, and you also do have the Citrus Berry. With Safety Goggles Arcanine as well, that's another reason that people run the water. However, I do like grass for the specific reason, the fact that Amoonguss being your grass type means that you're not actually getting a good defensive check to mons like Great Tusk. It's still a neutral hit, of course, and you do still have Palafin that can do offensive damage to it. But at the same time, you don't actually have a dedicated ground check. So personally, when I build these cores, I do like the Terra Grass Arcanine, despite the Safety Goggles being here, because it does give me an option if I need to Terra Arcanine. But typically speaking, Arcanine isn't a Terramon anyway in most matchups. It's really just meant to be a luxury. That is another reason though for Terra Flying. However, the issue with Terra Flying is the fact that it does make you now weaker to Rock Slide and Ice Spinner. So it's give and take there. Grass is still weak to Ice Spinner anyway, but at the very least it's not weak to Rock Slide. So I typically do opt for this one. Really, any Terra that you throw on this mon is going to be pretty strong though, to be honest, because it's just meant to help defensively. Once you get outside of these Pokemon though, Palafin, oh yeah, right, Palafin typically goes Haze Protect as final moves, and then Arcanine typically goes like Flare Blitz, then you go with Protect or Snarl there, and then you go with Extreme Speed. Really these two bottom ones here are interchangeable with Snarl. I typically like this combination personally in this metagame. I feel like the priority is really valuable next to Palafin, but Snarl does still have a lot of benefits with helping just take things more defensively speaking. But yeah, the Arcanine spread, it's really just versatile. It depends on whatever you end up really needing to check with this. We have a ton of different Arcanines, and I can even actually go through my builders and show a different set of Arcanines. For example, this is a defensive Arcanine set right here. This one is meant to creep Annihilate. This was meant for early meta though, for what it's worth. This one, actually, I think all my Arcanines in my builder right now are the same exact spread, because these were all early meta teams, and all the Arcanines I've used since have been rentals. So I don't actually have an Arcanine that's outside of that, but that's a personal one that I do go with. Albeit, I know that Annihilate doesn't typically run speed in this format, but I do like the speed benchmark anyway. It's still good to creep other base 90s or other mons like Great Tusk, for example, because the difference between going for like a Great Tusk, for example, with 154, or going for Annihilate, it's not really a lot of investment, and Arcanine typically doesn't care about that. So I personally do like to go the little bit of the extra mile and guarantee that I am going to burn any Annihilate in my face anyway. So that's really why I typically go with 220, and then you obviously typically will go with like max HP, and then the rest it's just thrown into something like a Spadef, or really whatever you end up needing it for. In particular though, this particular team, we'll just go with max Spadef, mostly just to simplify it, because you'll have Intimidate to drop physical attack anyway, and you'll also have Will-O-Wisp for this as well. Most common physical attackers will be slower than you, though you do need to be wary of Pokemon like Garchomp, though they do run Adamant a lot of the time in this format, so you can definitely get around Garchomp that way by just creeping for Adamant, which funny enough, you actually do perfectly creep with Adamant Garchomp as well with this team, because Adamant Garchomp yet again would have tied you at 154. Another speed benchmark to have hit would have been 155 at that point, but again, you're even closer to that Annihilate mark at this point, so it's even more pointless to not just creep max speed Jolly Annihilate, which will literally outpace you by 1 point. The Palafin here, again, really a lot of luxury. Then Amoonguss has so much defensive versatility. We'll steal another Amoonguss that I can at least explain properly. Here we go. This was an Amoonguss that I actually used pretty recently. This was one that essentially the logic in the spread being, if I remember correctly, this is an Iron Bundle calc, but I could actually be wrong in that. I'm pretty sure it's actually for Specs Iron Bundle, but again, that might be something that I'm wrong on. Let me double check, because I know it was for some sort of SPDF investment. Let me see. So we have 100 in special defense and 252 HP with the Terra when it was a Choice Specs Iron Bundle. Choice Specs. Yeah, so this is essentially for the Iron Bundle roll. You can guarantee take a Choice Specs Iron Bundle hit, which also means that you could take like Booster Terra Ice or like a Life Orb Iron Bundle. Point being is that you could take any reasonable Iron Bundle hit. Really, you would have to start going for Blizzard on Hail teams to actually not take that. And even still, you can always just go for like a Terra Water if you are fearing of a Blizzard for whatever reason. So this Amoonguss is typically the one that I run. There's a lot of different good Amoonguss spreads though. One of the important things though is making sure that you are 0 speed IV, as Amoonguss is a really good mon under Trick Room, and making sure that you can underpace threats and go for spores really quickly is a really good out for this team, especially if you want to try and start spamming Wave Crash Palafin, or even just going for Jet Punch intermittently while you're going for the spores here. So these three in particular, they do offer you a really good starting point for this team. And moving on, we are going to throw the classic Fluttermane on here. While it isn't exactly like the necessary pick, it's so low drawback that you may as well. Typically, if we look through a lot of these teams yet again, we can see a focus on Choice Specs Fluttermane, Choice Specs Fluttermane, Booster Fluttermane, Booster Fluttermane, Booster Fluttermane. Then we have no Fluttermane, but that's Goldengo. Then we have Choice Specs Fluttermane and Choice Specs Fluttermane. So as you can see, there's a common trend between Choice Specs and Booster Fluttermane on these particular builds. Personally, I do like the Booster Fluttermane a little bit more. One of the biggest reasons is that it offers Protect, which helps a lot more with scouting here. But also, I don't really value having the Choice Specs. It doesn't need to be a breaker. We already have Palafin as a really strong one, and you'll still do a ton of damage anyway, in particular with these sort of builds. This just simplifies things a lot anyway. If we're looking for a speed tier to hit, I do like the 132 speed Timid. This will offer you at least a really strong creep for Roaring Moon, and you still get the booster speed anyway, so you do always outpace that. From here, I typically do like to go with the 116 and then 4 and 4. The 4 and 4 here in particular is a pretty small team building note, but essentially if we go with 124, you just have a max leftover HP Fluttermane. However, by going to 116, we get one more stat point in each of these stats, so it's a slightly better bulk investment. Now, from here, typically, we wouldn't really want to take out more, as in typical cases like this, you would probably get the most investment out of going for front-loading in PhysDef. That would, technically speaking, give you more mileage on the PhysDef bulk side. Even with the max HP, you would always be taking hits better, in this case, by going for max PhysDef, just because of how low the stat is. However, at the same time, though, we're taking special defensive hits a lot worse, so stuff like opposing Fluttermane, for example, would be a little harder to take. So, in this particular case, it is really valuable. Also, another reason why this Fluttermane calc in particular is really valuable is if we look at opposing other Fluttermanes that have like the timid nature, for example, and we calc the 116 spread with 4 SPDF, we can actually guarantee take this hit. Even if it's a modest, actually, we do guarantee take any non-boosting item Fluttermane hit. So modest Fluttermane, for example, with the Focus Sash would be doing 99.3% to this. So it's another really strong metric that just by even taking out like a little bit of that bulk, we can no longer take. So it is a really important calc, and that's one of the reasons I do like this spread so much. The 4 SPDF, albeit, is a little bit left over at this point, because you could just hit that with 116 speed actually, but it is still nonetheless a really good metric to hit. You don't really need to go with max speed though. Most other Fluttermanes don't run faster than this anyway in this format, and if they do, they're quite literally max. But again, you could take the hit anyway, and you are booster speeding versus those. Typically, the max speed's really only found in Specs or Sash Fluttermane, and I don't think a Sash is really good on this archetype because of the fact that you're typically banking on beating priority while also dealing it out and just dealing it off attacks as fast as possible with the support of Arcanine and Amoonguss. Typically, though, for a Terra type, you have a couple of really good ones. While we can look through a lot of these and we'll see a lot of Fairy and Steel, Some other okay Tire types are going to be, in fact, I think these are all Fairy and Steel, with the exception of the Goldengo, which was Water. Yeah, all Fairy and Steel. You can typically also run Water, Grass, etc. I do like the Fairy personally here, though Steel is a lot of merit. It's great for opposing Fluttermane mirrors, because just like with Fairy, you're getting rid of your weakness to Ghost typing, but you're also going to typically become resistant to Fairy here. Well, not typically, you will become resistant to Fairy here, which has its benefits. If you think of it this way, when you're playing in a Fluttermane mirror, if you're expecting your opponent to Tera Fairy to get out of the weakness to Shadow Ball, in that point of view, you should always be clicking Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam, because those will be your strongest attacks due to the fact that you're no longer going to be fighting something that takes super effective damage from Shadow Ball. And those are higher, well, Gleam is a spread move, and Shadow Ball does less damage than Moonblast anyway. So with that in mind, why not just click Moonblast there? And this is where Terra Steel comes in, because it does get you essentially the mind game prediction here. It's amazing in close sheet. It still is really valuable in open, but typically though, I do opt for the damage, as Palafin and Fluttermane are meant to be your two breakers on the team, with Palafin banking more soft priority and this just banking off of being a really fast speed boosting option with some slight bulk investment. So moving on to our other Pokemon here, this really comes down to preference. Now, these four in particular are really hard to beat with just any one Pokemon. Essentially, these four Pokemon do beat every common threat in the metagame, so there's not really a reason to run any specific threat. Typically, what I do like to look for here is just a really strong Dark type. This typically comes in the form of a Ruin, but it doesn't have to be necessarily. Even if we do look at a lot of those other teams, for example, if we go back to our window right here, we can see Tinglu on the first team here, for example. We can also see Tinglu on team number 7 from Nicholas Khan, for example. So both of those obviously featured Ruin Pokemon. If we go here, we can see that Justin Tang's team features a Chien-Pao, which is pretty original for the concept, but it is still nonetheless a strong option here. It's one that I'm actually very fond of because it benefits Palafin a lot damage-wise, and the team is mostly built around Palafin's success, in my opinion. But if we continue down the line, we can see Tinglu yet again. We can that's actually it for this one. But for European, we can again see Tinglu. We can see Tinglu. We can see Tinglu on team number 7. And then for the, there was one other team. All right, the Chien-Pao version with Goldengo. That's Chien-Pao. So it's like one of 2 teams that did Chien-Pao. Typically, though, they go with Tinglu. You can still get mileage out of other Pokemon, though, like King Gambit. You could even throw Chiyu, arguably, on this team, but I probably wouldn't just because of the overlap with Arcanine in terms of a fire type. And while fire is a really good typing in this metagame, it's not a great one to stack, as you're typically going to have to deal with common moves like Rock Slide and Earthquake. Though Scarf Chiyu is a pretty decent threat. It's a great speed boosting option as well, and with Fluttermane, it does give you a nice option in tandem with the Palafin Arcanine core. Typically, though, I do like to personally play a little more offensive, so for the sake of my personal playstyle, I am going to opt to throw Chien-Pao on this team, though Tinglu is still a really strong threat nonetheless. With Chien-Pao in this particular case, especially with the Pokemon that we have built up, I do like the idea of going with the... Well, actually, I'm not going to go with Chien-Pao, purely for the fact that it's either going to be Dragonite or Dragapult as a 6th slot with this, and I feel like that at least with Tinglu, we can get a little bit more versatility out of that. Now, as far as the Tinglu spread that I actually personally liked, we're going to have to go to a sneak peek, I guess, the members video for Friday. Shameless plug, shameless plug. But I did... Oh, wait, hold on. This is the wrong team. This is the wrong team. Tinglu, here we go. Okay. So this is a spread that in particular I did like a lot. No, wait. This is still the... Oh, wait, this is the Palafin version of the team. I'm dumb. I need to look for the Dragonite version. I'm so sorry. Here we go. So this is a strong version of the Tinglu AV spread concept that I've personally been a fan of. This one features Terra Water. The reason for Terra Water on this team was personally because of the fact that I did have a Wo-Chien on the build as well. So we are actually going to probably switch that to... I might actually switch Arcanine to Terra Water and then go with Terra Grass on the Tinglu. Mostly just because I do think that Terra Grass Tinglu is still really good. This essentially, again, forces that sort of good check to Great Tusk, because you not only get rid of your weakness to fighting, but you also then become resistant to ground, which is really good. Stomping Tantrum, Fissure, Heavy Slam, and Ruination, all really strong attacks. Essentially with this spread, if I remember correctly, this was to make sure that we could B3 KO by Specs Fluttermane with Tinglu, which was really valuable. I believe I calculated this for like Specs Fluttermane, even pre-Terra, if I remember correctly. No, it was post-Terra. It was definitely post-Terra, yeah. 36 and then 156, and then we go for the Terra here. Yeah, so the Moonblast essentially is always going to be a 3-8 KO here, even from my Specs Fluttermane. Even if we throw on the special defense drop, that's actually specifically what this was for Fluttermane next to Chiyu. We can definitely throw in a little bit more into the Phys Def, to be honest. But the reason why we have 156 HP versus 140 versus 140 is actually, I guess I fucked up my EV spread. Yeah, so apparently I fucked up my EV spread. I could have done that a little bit better. But essentially the reason why we go with the 148 HP here is mostly because of the fact that going with 140 doesn't really gain you anything in the Fizz Def. If I remember correctly, this was for some sort of Dragonite damage roll from Banded Dragonite, which this can at least do some okay work versus. It's more so the fact that Dragonite is just such a good breaker in this format. And when you do have to worry about stuff like the defense drops from the Terra Normal Bandit set, in particular, having 244 in your attack, well actually, the spread actually in particular happens to take it perfectly. But yeah, so you're essentially 3 killed with the sort of ruined defense drops, which is pretty cool, thanks to your choice band. However, if you were to obviously dip this down to 240, you're not taking that anymore. So this is a really good threat nonetheless in terms of your defensive merit. The 76 attack is just meant to be left over at this point, but it is still really strong nonetheless. You can obviously still go for just really any sort of damaging attack here, but Tinglu overall is just a really good defensive threat, and it is a really strong Pokemon in this format in my opinion. Definitely something that I think that a lot of people will have to worry about because of the fact that Tinglu is just such a good breaker here. And it's also not only such a good breaker thanks to stuff like Ruination and Stomping Tantrum doing a lot of damage coming off of Fisher, but Fisher is also just a great slot killer. So in case of any bad matchups you might have, it is still a really valuable slot. You can definitely go for Terra Water if you're a little bit worried about backs here, but in this particular concept, I would probably end up opting for just a really strong secondary option for backs, because typically backs will go for something like a Terra Ground, or like a Terra Fire, or even like, I don't know, there's a lot of different Terra types that backs can go for here. And Fluttermane can definitely handle some of those. Stuff like Terra Fire and Ground, obviously Palafin can just nuke later on in the match, but it's more so about trying to know what it can handle, because this team definitely on paper would be fairly weak to something like a Bax Caliber. So if we look at a lot of the other types of teams that were ran, we can see that, for example, Dragonite is 6th slot here. We have Roaring Moon on the Sam Pandelis team, which you can see peeking out. I'll actually just go back to the showdown window and the window for this. We can continue to see that as far as the Tinglu variations go, this one is King Gambit actually, which is a pretty decent check. Personally, King Gambit was actually a really strong threat. We can obviously also embrace Bax Caliber. I know this is a slightly different team, but it's still pretty similar in terms of what it would actually do, just slightly different mons. But Bax Caliber is still a really good threat that we can obviously throw on the team. Looking at this as well, again, you could actually see a Bax Caliber here in the Gabriel version, which consists of a Terra Poison Bax Caliber. I think that something like that actually would be what I would probably opt for here. I do like the Bax Caliber or King Gambit. They're both really strong partners. If we're looking at other options though, you really do have a lot of different threats you can throw on here. Tinglu, we'll look through Tinglu builds, for example, with other balances. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have a lot of teams of this archetype. Yeah, I guess I don't. Okay, so I guess for our last one of the team, I think I am gonna throw on the Bax Caliber, and I think instead of Clear Amulet though, I am gonna go with the Assault Vest, mostly just because I do think that we have, actually no, right, we have Assault Vest Tinglu. Okay, so then we do need to go with probably Clear Amulet, yeah. So we'll go Clear Amulet, and we'll go with probably not Terra Poison. I do still like the fact that we could probably go with Terra Fire. The reason being for Terra Fire is mostly for the fact that we can gain a resistance to stuff like Fluttermane. Actually, no, I think I'm gonna go with Terra. I think I'm gonna go with Terra Steel. The biggest reason is that you're still gonna be weak to Rock as well with the Terra typing anyway, with going for Terra Fire. But with Steel, we can at least gain a resistance to that. Actually, no, I think I've talked myself into Poison, because we'll gain a fighting check to that, and we're not gonna be weak to Rock still. We're also going to be able to just massacre any sort of ground types with our Ice Stabs. I think that instead of Protect though, because we do have the support from Amoonguss, I actually do want to opt for Dragon Dance here. I do think that Dragon Dance, we'll actually go with Loaded. No, I do kind of like Iso Crash. And then not going with Spear. There's not really a lot of Sash Mons outside of Fluttermane in this format. We can definitely opt to just 2-target that. We'll go with Ice Shard, and then we'll go with Glaive Rush. One of the biggest reasons that Bax is really good in this format is because of the fact that, one, Bax is just a really bulky piece of shit mon, but two, that Bax is a really strong damage breaker, and with Glaive Rush into Ice Shard, you can actually ignore the downside that Glaive Rush would have by going for the Ice Shard and then getting off strong damage, and especially with the Dragon Dance variant in particular, you can actually invest and just be a really obnoxious breaker. And then just start going for Glaive Rush into Ice Shard. Most Pokemon barely take the Glaive Rush unboosted, so when you're at +1 now, you're going to be kind of insane. We do sadly need to go with the Jolly Excalibur because we're going with Dragon Dance, and the spread that we're going to end up opting to creep, we don't really need to go with max speed, truthfully. This is, if I remember correctly, this will tie Great Tusk at max speed, and I don't think we really need to go with that personally. So what I am actually going to do instead is I'm going to opt to creep Dragapult. Dragapult has finally become a noteworthy enough Pokemon in this format to where I do think that creeping this on a Dragon Dance set is personally pretty valuable. So we are going to go with Jolly. We could go with Adamant Max Attack 2, at max speed 2, and that would creep Iron Bundle. However, I do think that instead going with the 180 speed will be more beneficial here. So this spread in particular will be designed to creep the Dragapult, and then we could probably just go with Max Attack, truthfully. This isn't meant to be like a really bulky Excalibur because of the fact that we don't have an Assault Vest here, though Excalibur will still be natively bulky anyway. One thing that I will try and see if we can take is at least like a Focus Sash Fluttermane hit. It does not seem like we will. What about post-Terra? Can we take like a Choice Banded like a Adamant Terra Water Palafin hit? Just because Palafin's something that we could definitely Glaive Rush, and this is meant to be a really strong check for that. So Palafin Hero, when we do go for Terra, we can definitely actually take the Jet Punch very comfortably, in fact. And then meanwhile, with Glaive Rush, we can, at +1, we should be able to nearly KO Palafin, actually, with that. Even if it's bulky, we do 82 to 97, and partnering with the Palafin or the Arcanine, for example, we can actually guarantee that KO. And even if Palafin is actually going next to a Sword of Ruin Pokemon, instead of KOing Excalibur, which truthfully, we could actually take that Terra Water boosted Jet Punch with no actual investment, but we can actually guarantee KO Palafin back instead, which is pretty cool. So I do like that a lot. In terms of one other thing that I do want to check is Dragonite. Terra normal banded E-Speed from Dragonite. It does seem like maybe the investment might matter for this. Yeah, so it doesn't actually matter where we put it in particular. 76 HP will still guarantee take that. So we're just going to go with HP. There's not really a reason to overcomplicate this. I just wanted to check a few common priority options that might either outpace Excalibur in general. Arcanine, not Arcanine, typically, for example, the Dragonite will definitely outpace just priority-wise with Banded Terra normal E-Speed, and we could just go for a Glaive Rush. Even if it is Terra, actually, thanks to the Sword of Ruin, we would kill that guaranteed, because they almost always run Inner Focus over Multiscale, so that's a pretty free option for us there. But even still, for stuff like Palafin, it never really runs speed for this, but it's still good to just break that, because Palafin could typically be a mon that would at least be checking Ice types. So stuff like that will always be very helpful for our Excalibur. So this is going to be the team. I'll try and actually feature this at some point. I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow, but it'll probably be in some point next week. I actually do have a team prepared for tomorrow that I'm going to be using. Another team that a channel member had actually suggested, so I do want to try that out. But hopefully you guys learned something today from this video, and if you did and you want to see some more content like this, of course, leave a like in the video and subscribe for more. And let me know what types of archetypes you guys want to see in the next one of these videos. With that said, a shout out to channel members, of course, being Josh K Ultra Player, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, Bbat, Anna DePer, Fonzie, Timo Mueller, Bambambi, Rao Plays, Obo, and Johannes B. Your guys' support is greatly appreciated, and if you want to become a channel member today, on Friday, we're going to be having a exclusive video for the channel members, where we are going to be getting to Master Ball with all of the Ruin Pokemon. The video is in the final stages of editing now, and it should be up for 7 PM EST, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out, guys.